My beloved children, I come to you today not as a distant figure enshrined in stained glass and ancient prayers, but as your mother whose heart beats with every joy and sorrow of yours. In these turbulent times, when the world spins ever faster and the old certainties seem to crumble, I reach across time and space to hold you close. Just as I once cradled the infant Jesuses in the quiet of that holy night, I cradle each of you now in my heart. Let me share with you about fear and faith, about the moments when divine purpose meets human uncertainty. When Gabriel appeared in my simple room in Nazareth, the divine light that filled that space was both glorious and terrifying. I was young, barely more than a child myself, when heaven's plan intersected with my ordinary life. In that moment of profound choice, I felt what many of you feel now, the trembling before an unknown future, the weight of decision, the wondering if you are enough for what lies ahead. I remember clearly how my voice shook as I asked, "How can this be?" My question wasn't doubt, but human wonder seeking understanding, just as many of you now ask your own questions about purpose, meaning, and divine will. The angel's presence filled my small room with light so bright it turned the familiar strange. Yet in that transformative moment, I learned something I want to share with you. Sometimes our greatest moments of grace come disguised as disruption, as upheaval, as impossible challenges. I see how many of you wake each morning carrying burdens that seem too heavy to bear. In this digital age, where screens glow through the night and notifications never cease, many of you feel more isolated than ever. Behind carefully curated social media posts and professional smiles, I see the tears you hide, the anxiety that gnaws at your peace, the loneliness that no number of virtual connections seems to fill. Just as I once watched Jesus grow in a world that increasingly couldn't understand him, I watch you navigate this complex modern landscape. Let me speak first to those of you struggling with the pace of modern life, the constant pressure to be productive, to be connected, to be relevant. The endless stream of information and expectations can leave you feeling perpetually behind, eternally inadequate. Remember how Jesus would often withdraw to quiet places, even when crowds sought him. That wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Your need for rest, for silence, for disconnection is not a flaw to be overcome, but a sacred boundary to be honored. To my children battling mental health challenges in this age of anxiety, I see how the world's chaos amplifies your internal struggles. The depression that colors your world in shades of gray, the anxiety that ties your stomach in knots, the trauma that haunts your quiet moments, these are not signs of spiritual failure. When Jesus sweat blood in Gethsemane, his mental anguish was as real as his physical pain would be. Your psychological pain is equally valid, equally deserving of care and understanding. For those of you fighting addiction, whether to substances, screens, social media, or any other force that seems to control your life, I understand the depth of your struggle. The woman who touched Jesus' garment believed that even that small connection could bring healing. You're reaching out for help, whether through therapy, support groups, or trusted friends, shows the same courage, the same faith that healing is possible. Each step toward recovery, no matter how small, is sacred ground. I see my children wrestling with identity in a world that seems to demand you be everything to everyone. Some of you feel torn between cultures, between traditions, between expectations. Others struggle with gender identity or sexual orientation in communities that don't understand. Remember how Jesus defied the rigid categories of his time. He showed us that God's love transcends human boundaries and definitions. Your journey to authentic selfhood is holy work. To those carrying the weight of ecological grief, watching forests burn, oceans rise, and species vanish, I understand your heart hatch for creation. When God entrusted me with nurturing the incarnate Christ, he also taught me about our sacred duty to care for all that he has made. Your concern for the earth isn't separate from your faith, it's an expression of it. Your work to protect and heal our common home is divine service. For my children navigating the complexities of family life in this modern age, those trying to parent mindfully in a distracted world, those balancing career and family, those caring for aging parents while raising children. I see your daily sacrifices. During our years in Nazareth, I learned that holiness often wears the face of ordinary love, of daily choices to be present, to be patient, to persist in caring even when exhausted. I see those of you struggling with faith in an increasingly secular world. Some of you feel isolated in your workplaces or universities, afraid to speak of your beliefs. Others question how to reconcile scientific understanding with spiritual truth. Still others feel caught between traditional faith and modern values. Let me share something I learned during Jesus' years of public ministry. Truth doesn't fear questions. Just as I pondered many things in my heart while watching my son challenge traditional interpretations, you too can hold both intellectual honesty and deep faith. To my children fighting battles in the digital realm, those facing cyberbullying, those struggling with online addiction, those feeling inadequate in the face of carefully curated social media lives, I understand this new form of suffering. Though these technologies didn't exist in my time, I understand the human heart's need for authentic connection, for true community, for real presence. Remember how Jesus always saw the person behind the label, the soul behind the surface. You too are more than your online presence, more than your follower count, more than your digital footprint. For those carrying the weight of generational trauma, patterns of pain passed down through families like unwanted inheritances, I see your determination to break these cycles. When Elizabeth and I came together, both carrying children who would break ancient patterns, we understood that transformation is possible. Your effort to heal, to change, to choose differently, this isn't just personal work. It's sacred service to future generations. I see my children struggling with loneliness in crowds, with disconnection in a connected world. The paradox of modern life, never more linked yet never more isolated, weighs heavily on many hearts. During the years of Jesus' public ministry, I often watched from a distance, feeling both connected and separate, understanding both the power and the pain of standing apart. Your longing for deeper connection, for authentic community, for true understanding, this is holy hunger. To those battling the effects of social media comparison, measuring your lives against carefully filtered versions of others' experiences, I want to share a truth. The most profound moments of divine encounter often happen in ordinary settings, in imperfect circumstances. The Annunciation came to me not in a temple, but in my simple home. The greatest miracle of all time began not in a palace, but in a stable. Your unfiltered, authentic life is the perfect setting for divine grace. For my children trying to maintain hope in the face of global challenges, climate crisis, political division, economic uncertainty, I understand the temptation to despair. When we fled to Egypt as refugees, the future seemed dark and uncertain. But even in displacement, divine purpose was at work. Your efforts to create positive change, to choose hope over cynicism, to work for justice, these are acts of faith as profound as any miracle. I see those of you struggling with the pace of technological change, feeling left behind or overwhelmed by constant innovation. Some of you fear for your jobs as automation advances. Others feel exhausted trying to keep up with endless updates and new platforms. Remember that divine wisdom transcends human progress. The same eternal truths that guided generations before, love, compassion, justice, mercy, remain your truest compass. For those navigating cross-cultural identities, feeling caught between worlds, struggling to honor multiple traditions, searching for belonging, I see your complex journey. When we lived as refugees in Egypt, I learned how it feels to be other, to adapt while maintaining what's essential, to find home in seeming displacement. Your ability to bridge worlds, to hold multiple truths, to create new forms of belonging, this is holy work that enriches the entire human family. To my children working in artificial intelligence and emerging technologies, those wrestling with ethical questions about the future of human consciousness and connection, I understand your deep questions about what it means to be human. When I carried Jesus in my womb, divinity and humanity merged in a way that transformed our understanding of both. Your work to ensure that technological progress serves human flourishing and divine purpose is crucial spiritual work for our time. I see those of you struggling with chronic illness or invisible disabilities in a world that often misunderstands invisible pain. Some of you face skepticism from doctors, judgment from friends, or isolation in your suffering. When I stood at the foot of the cross, watching suffering that most couldn't comprehend, I learned something profound about silent strength and unseen endurance. Your daily courage in living with limitations while maintaining hope is a quiet kind of heroism. For my children working to build interfaith bridges, those seeking to create understanding across religious divisions, those working for peace in divided communities, I see your challenging path. Remember how Jesus spoke with the Samaritan woman, crossing boundaries that others feared to breach. Your work to build understanding, to find common ground, to create peace, this is sacred work that mirrors divine love's boundless reach. To those feeling overwhelmed by information overload, drowning in news cycles, paralyzed by endless choices, exhausted by constant input, I understand your need for sacred silence. In Nazareth, life moved at a human pace, allowing space for deep pondering, for holy waiting, for divine insight to emerge. Your longing for quiet, for simplicity, for clear guidance. This is your spirit seeking what it needs to thrive. I see my children working in helping professions, teachers, healthcare workers, counselors, social workers, many of you exhausted by compassion fatigue and systemic challenges. During Jesus' ministry, I watched him pour himself out for others while also taking time for renewal. Your work to heal, to teach, to support others is a reflection of divine love, but remember that even divine love took time to rest. For those struggling with climate anxiety, carrying the weight of Earth's future, fighting for environmental justice, seeking hope in the face of ecological crisis, I share your deep concern for creation. The Incarnation teaches us that divine love takes physical form, that matter matters, that the earth itself is holy ground. Your work to protect and heal our common home is as much a spiritual practice as any prayer. To my children experiencing spiritual deconstruction, questioning inherited beliefs, exploring new understandings of faith, feeling lost between old certainties and new questions, I understand this sacred upheaval. Remember how Jesus' teachings often began with, "You have heard it said," but I tell you, sometimes growth requires us to examine our foundations, to let what is essential emerge from what is familiar. For those wrestling with artificial markers of success, social media metrics, professional titles, material acquisitions, I want to remind you of a deeper truth. When Gabriel came to me, I had none of what the world considers valuable. No status, no wealth, no influence. Yet in that moment of divine encounter, I learned that true worth is measured not by what we possess, but by how deeply we love, how courageously we serve, how faithfully we respond to divine calling. To my children struggling with burnout in a culture of perpetual productivity, those feeling guilty for needing rest, those measuring their worth by their output, those afraid to pause, I want to share a truth learned in the quiet years of Nazareth. Productivity is not proximity to God. Jesus spent 30 years in seeming obscurity before his public ministry began. These weren't wasted years, they were years of deep formation. Your seasons of rest, of waiting, of being rather than doing are equally sacred. I see those of you navigating the complexities of modern relationships, dating apps that reduce human connection to swipes, marriages strained by digital distraction, friendships challenged by physical distance and virtual proximity. During my journey with Joseph, I learned that true intimacy grows in the space of real presence, of shared silence, of patient understanding. Your longing for authentic connection in this digital age reflects a holy hunger for genuine communion. For my children working in creative fields, writers, musicians, dancers, many of you struggling to maintain authentic expression in a market creative-driven world. Remember that before Jesus taught with words, he learned to create with wood in Joseph's workshop. Creativity is not separate from spirituality. It is one of the clearest ways we reflect divine nature. Your work to bring beauty, truth, and meaning into the world is holy service. To those battling perfectionism in an age of curated personas, those exhausted by the pressure to present flawless images, those afraid to reveal their authentic struggles, those measuring themselves against impossible standards, I want to share something about divine love. When God chose me to be Jesus' mother, he didn't choose me for my perfection, but for my willingness to say yes to divine purpose. Uncertainties and all, your imperfections are not obstacles to divine love. They are opportunities for grace to shine through. I see my children struggling with decision paralysis in a world of endless options, career choices, relationship decisions, lifestyle possibilities that seem to multiply endlessly. When I said yes to Gabriel's message, I couldn't see the full path ahead. I learned that sometimes courage isn't about knowing the whole journey, but about taking the next faithful step. Your thoughtful wrestling with choices is itself a form of spiritual devotion. For those fighting to maintain hope in the face of systemic injustice, activists, advocates, and all who work for positive change, I want to remind you of the revolutionary nature of divine love. My Magnificat wasn't just a song of praise, it was a declaration of divine justice that envisions the mighty brought down and the lowly lifted up. Your work for justice, your refusal to accept oppression as normal, your vision of a more equitable world, these align with heaven's deepest purposes. To my children carrying the weight of intergenerational responsibility, those supporting aging parents while raising children, those trying to heal family trauma while creating new patterns, those bridging old traditions with new realities, I understand your complex burden. In my relationship with Jesus, I had to learn to parent a child whose purpose exceeded my understanding. Your work to honor what's past while creating space for what's emerging is sacred bridge building. For those working in emerging fields, biotechnology, space exploration, quantum computing, fields that raise profound questions about human nature and divine purpose, I understand your deep ethical questions. When I carried Jesus in my womb, I experienced firsthand how divine potential can work through human means. Your work to expand human knowledge while maintaining ethical boundaries is crucial spiritual work for our time. To my children struggling with eco-anxiety and climate grief, watching species disappear, landscapes change, and feeling the weight of environmental crisis, I share your deep sorrow for creation. The incarnation itself teaches us that the physical world is holy, worthy of love and protection. Your grief for the earth is holy grief. Your work to heal our common home is sacred service. I see those of you walking through dark nights of the soul, times when God seems absent, when prayer feels empty, when faith seems to slip through your fingers like sand. Even Jesus cried out, "Why have you forsaken me?" from the cross. These moments of seeming abandonment are not failures of faith. They are deep encounters with mystery that can lead to profound transformation. For my children facing the challenges of raising faithful kids in a secular world, trying to transmit values in a culture that often undermines them, seeking to nurture spiritual roots in rocky soil, I understand your concerns. As I watched Jesus grow in wisdom and stature, I learned that faith isn't transmitted through force or fear, but through love, example, and respect for each soul's unique journey. To those experiencing the particular loneliness of being single in a couple-oriented world, or childless in a culture that often defines worth through parenthood, I see you with a mother's tender heart. Divine love is not limited to human categories or life stages. Your capacity to love, to create family in new ways, to nurture others through your gifts is a reflection of divine creativity. As I draw this letter to a close, my beloved children, I want to leave you with 3 eternal truths that transcend all time and circumstance. First, you are loved, not for what you achieve, create, or accomplish, but for who you are. Just as I loved Jesus before he performed any miracles, before he gathered any followers, divine love embraces you in your simple being. Second, your struggles are sacred ground, whether visible or invisible, whether understood by others or carried alone. Your challenges are opportunities for divine love to work in unique ways through your life. Third, you are never alone. Just as I stood at the foot of the cross when others fled, I stand with you now in your moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and despair. My love, like divine love, knows no boundaries of time or space. Remember, my cherished ones, that hope is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love. Even in your darkest moments, even when the path ahead seems unclear, even when doubt clouds your heart, you are held in love's eternal embrace. Let the tears you cry water the seeds of new growth within you. Let your questions open spaces for deeper wisdom to enter. Let your struggles strengthen your capacity for compassion. Above all, let my love remind you of your unshakable worth, your eternal dignity, your sacred place in the divine family. Peace be with you, my beloved children. Peace be with you in your striving and your resting, your believing and your doubting, your rising and your falling. Peace be with you in the sacred ordinary moments of each day. Peace be with you as you continue your unique journey, held always in a mother's eternal love. With eternal tender love, Mary,